Mr. Speaker, at the outset, it is important for Kenyans to understand that when members of parliament speak of needing the CDF, they do not need it for themselves. With or without the CDF, the members of parliament have their salaries. And in fact, without the CDF, the workforce, the task is reduced. But Mr. Speaker, as we speak today, every day, and I'm sure I speak for all the members here, we get no less than 100 phone calls of children who are at home because they cannot get bursaries. So it is not the members who are suffering, it is the people. I want to announce, Mr. Speaker, that the one thing that unites Kenyans, and I had the privilege to write this constitution, everywhere we went, the one thing people supported was the CDF. And I will explain why we did not entrench it at the time. And I think we were wrong. We should have entrenched it at that time. Mr. Speaker, the principle of having the CDF is very noble. And it is the same principle of why we have devolved government at the county level. The same principle why in Article 173 we created the Judiciary Fund. So it's a bit ironical for the judiciary to find that the principle in the CDF is unconstitutional, but the Judiciary Fund is constitutional. Mr. Speaker, at the outset, it should be stated that although we support, and I support this initiative, and it will be moving forward, let it not be an excuse not to disburse CDF. I want to say here authoritatively, Mr. Speaker, that as we speak today, there is no court order, not of the High Court, not of the Court of Appeal, not of the Supreme Court, that stops disbursement of the CDF under the 2015 Act. None. And I want to urge that even as we meander our ways through this amendment, let the CDF be disbursed because it is constitutional as we speak. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Kaluma is, I think, has just arrived in this country. Mr. Speaker, I think that the drafting is very good. If you look at the drafting in terms of the proposal in 204A, it is appropriately placed because it comes immediately after the provisions on, on the fund that is similarly created for the purposes of bringing areas that have been behind. And if you look at this drafting, Mr. Speaker, it acknowledges that this is a national government fund. It acknowledges and proposes to increase it to 5%, which I think is appropriate. The more it is, the more Kenyans benefit, not us. But more importantly is the drafting in terms of being 5% of the Annual Division of Revenue Act. There has been an issue, and we all know, in terms of what you'd call gerrymandering by national government, and the counties have suffered this. And I think for us, this is very good. Mr. Speaker, I also want to note, however, that I will ask my 200 members to consider 2042. Insofar as it proposes that the funds be allocated and considered under Article 206(2)(c. I want to caution, Mr. Speaker, that the effect of that drafting is essentially to make this fund a charge on the consolidated fund. And I do not think that's what they intended. We do not need to go that way. Once we've put the percentages and we are the budget-making body, it becomes automatic. We do not need to make it a charge on the consolidated fund. Mr. Speaker, I support the idea of creating the Senate Oversight Fund and the Affirmative Action Fund. We can debate the percentages, that is fine. But, Mr. Speaker, I urge them, and only 2 more minutes, Mr. Speaker, I urge them to consider restricting it in 2 ways. One, it cannot be a fund to the senators to use if you are the senator for Siaya to go and use in Mombasa. Those funds must be restricted to the county where you are elected, and that so far is not done. And secondly, there must be a distinction between elected senators, elected members, and nominated members. Those nominated may not have equal responsibility as those who are elected. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, I think this is a good initiative. I think that this is one of those areas that require bipartisan support and consensus. And when it comes to Treasury, we expect that although it's a money bill, Treasury will support us. This is where, Mr. Speaker, we must assert ourselves as Parliament. If we cannot assert ourselves here, we will never assert ourselves anywhere. Let it be the first constitutional amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable. The Honorable